The cold weight of the Beaumont sapphire on Caley's neck felt less like a gift and more like a collar tonight. From across the grand ballroom at the Pierre Hotel, she watched her husband, Nathaniel Beaumont, laugh with a circle of investors. He was a portrait of power, but she knew the truth. She saw the subtle flick of his eyes towards the grand entrance, the slight tension in his jaw. He wasn't waiting for a business associate. He was waiting for her. And as the doors swung open to reveal a woman in a crimson dress that seemed to drink the light from the room, Caley placed a protective hand over the slight curve of her stomach. She knew this night wouldn't end in celebration. It would end in ashes. The only question was whose. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, a thick cream card with embossed gold lettering, the annual Metropolitan Philanthropic Gala. For Caley Beaumont, née Davenport, such invitations were now a routine part of life. They were milestones in a calendar dictated by charity auctions, seasonal openings, and exclusive board meetings. Tonight's event, held in the opulent grand ballroom of the Pierre on Fifth Avenue, was the glittering apex of the fall social season. It was a place to be seen, a place where multi-billion-dollar deals were sketched on cocktail napkins and dynasties were cemented with a handshake. For the past 4 years, Caley had played her part flawlessly. She was Mrs. Nathaniel Beaumont, the elegant, intelligent wife of the CEO of Beaumont Holdings, a global real estate and private equity behemoth. She was the woman who had, in the eyes of society, pages tamed the city's most formidable bachelor. Tonight, however, the role felt like a costume that was 2 sizes too tight. At 4 months pregnant, a soft, almost imperceptible swell was visible beneath the flowing silk of her custom navy blue Carolina Herrera gown. It was a secret she and Nate were supposed to be cherishing, a joy they planned to announce to their families next month. But lately, joy felt as distant as the crystal stars of the chandeliers above. The trouble had started subtly, a change in the atmosphere of their sprawling Upper East Side penthouse. Nate, once attentive and effusive, had become distant, his phone a permanent appendage to his hand. He'd started taking late-night emergency calls and having weekend strategy sessions that left him smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers, a sharp, aggressive scent of tuberose and spice. Caley wasn't naive. She had grown up in a world adjacent to this one. Her father was a respected, if not spectacularly wealthy surgeon. She knew the temptations that followed men like Nate, but she had believed they were different. Theirs was a love story that had felt genuine, built on shared laughter during trips to the Hamptons and quiet nights spent debating architecture, her passion, and market trends his. Now, as she stood by a marble column, a glass of sparkling water in her hand, she felt a profound sense of isolation. Nate had abandoned her minutes after they arrived, drawn into a magnetic circle that included titans of industry like Walter Jameson, the silver-haired patriarch of Jameson Investments, and Cassandra Lowell, the notoriously sharp-tongued CEO of Lowell Media Group. They were the kind of people who didn't just attend the gala. They were the gala. Caley watched her husband. He was captivating, his charisma, an almost tangible force. He gestured with his hands, his Patek Philippe watch catching the light, and his audience hung on every word. He was discussing the Ethelred merger, a hostile takeover of a European tech firm that would be the crowning achievement of his career. It was all he talked about, his voice filled with a feverish excitement that was absent when he spoke to her. She smoothed the silk over her stomach, a maternal instinct, already fierce and protective. This child, their child, was supposed to be the anchor that secured their future. Instead, It felt like she was drifting out to sea on a beautifully appointed but rudderless ship, and Nate was standing on the shore, waving goodbye. Her gaze drifted towards the grand entrance. A frisson of anxiety, cold and sharp, traced its way down her spine. She had a dreadful premonition, a certainty that festered in the pit of her stomach. She knew who Nate was waiting for. She had seen the name on his phone during a moment of weakness last week, a message that popped up with a name that had become a whisper in certain circles. Victoria Roche. Caley had looked her up. Victoria's social media was a curated masterpiece of ambition. She called herself a brand strategist and lifestyle consultant, but her true profession was far older. She was a huntress in a jungle of wealth and power, and her profile was a gallery of trophies posing on the deck of a yacht in Monaco, courtside at a Lakers game next to a tech mogul, laughing at a table in St. Bart's with a hedge fund manager. Her last few posts were all from New York. A waiter offered Caley a canapé, a delicate construction of quail egg and caviar. She politely declined the thought of food, making her stomach churn. She knew with the chilling certainty of a woman betrayed that Victoria Roche was coming here tonight. And she knew that her arrival wouldn't be a coincidence. It would be a declaration of war. The moment Victoria Roche arrived, the entire gravitational field of the ballroom seemed to shift. The double doors were opened by 2 uniformed attendants, and she paused on the threshold, a deliberate theatrical move designed for maximum impact. She was a vision in crimson. The dress was a bespoke Balenciaga, a column of scarlet silk so perfectly tailored it looked as though it had been poured onto her body. It was audacious, a stark slash of color in a sea of elegant blacks, navies, and jewel tones. It was a dress that didn't ask for attention. It seized it. A diamond Riviere necklace, a piece Caley recognized from a recent Sotheby's auction catalogue, glittered at her throat, its cold fire a perfect match for the glint in her eyes. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. People knew who she was. Or more accurately, they knew what she was. In this world, mistresses were often a quiet, discreetly managed affair. Victoria Roche was neither quiet nor discreet. She was a statement, a walking, talking symbol of conquest. From across the room, Caley saw Nate freeze for a fraction of a second. His easy smile tightened, and a flicker of something panic excitement crossed his face before being expertly masked. He excused himself from his conversation with Walter Jameson, who watched him leave with a shrewd, unreadable expression. Caley's heart began to hammer against her ribs. This was it. The abstract anxiety of the past few months was coalescing into a single, terrifying point in space and time. She watched as Victoria glided into the room, not with the uncertainty of a guest who didn't belong, but with the supreme confidence of a queen surveying her court. She greeted a few people with air kisses, her voice a low, husky purr that carried even over the music. And then her eyes, sharp and dark, as obsidian, found Caley. For a long moment, the two women simply looked at each other from across the opulent expanse. It was a silent exchange loaded with meaning. Caley saw a flash of triumph in Victoria's gaze, a predatory gleam that made her feel like prey. In that moment, Caley tightened her grip on her small clutch, her knuckles turning white. She would not be prey. She was a Beaumont. Yes, but she was a Davenport first, and the Davenports did not break. Nate intercepted Victoria near the champagne tower, his body language a frantic mix of feigned nonchalance and genuine alarm. He kept his back to Caley, a cowardly act that was somehow more insulting than an open confrontation. Caley could read the conversation in the rigid set of his shoulders and Victoria's dismissive, confident gestures. He was trying to manage her to control the situation. But Victoria Roche was not a woman who could be managed. She thrived on chaos. After a few tense minutes, Nate steered her towards a less crowded alcove, but her eyes kept flicking back towards Caley, a small, cruel smile playing on her perfectly painted red lips. The performance was for her benefit. Every casual touch of Nate's arm, every intimate lean-in, was a carefully aimed dart. Cassandra Lowell, who had been observing the entire exchange with the focused intensity of a hawk, appeared at Caley's side. Her presence was formidable, her aura of power a stark contrast to Caley's carefully maintained composure. "That dress is screaming louder than the string quartet," Cassandra murmured, her eyes fixed on Victoria. "Beaumont has always had more money than sense." It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. "Cassandra." Caley acknowledged, her voice remarkably steady. "Good to see you." "Is it?" Cassandra's gaze shifted to Caley, and for a moment her expression softened with something that looked almost like sympathy. "You're handling this with remarkable grace, my dear. Most women would have thrown a Dom Perignon bath for that little tramp by now." Caley offered a weak smile. "My mother taught me that public displays are always a sign of losing." "Your mother is a wise woman," Cassandra said, taking a sip of her gin martini. "But sometimes a tactical explosion is necessary to clear the field. Remember that." She gave Caley's arm a light squeeze before moving on, leaving Caley alone with her thoughts and the tightening knot of dread in her stomach. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Nate was still with Victoria, and now they were laughing. The sound scraped against Caley's nerves. She felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on her. She was the subject of pitying glances and hushed whispers. The Beaumont sapphire around her neck felt like it was actively trying to choke her. She needed to leave to escape the suffocating weight of public humiliation. But as she took a step towards the exit, she saw Victoria detach herself from Nate. She started walking not towards the bar, not towards another group of guests, but directly towards Caley. Her walk was a slow, deliberate saunter, the crimson dress swaying with a predator's rhythm. The ambient noise of the gala seemed to fade into a dull roar. The air grew thick and heavy. The serpent was coming to strike. As Victoria Roche approached, a small, self-contained bubble of silence seemed to form around them. People nearby subtly shifted their positions, not to leave, but to get a better view. The scent of her tuberose perfume preceded her, an cloying, invasive scent that made Caley's stomach lurch. "Caley, darling," Victoria began, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. She stopped a few feet away, her head tilted in a mockery of polite inquiry. "I'm Victoria Roche. I don't believe we've been formally introduced, though I feel like I know so much about you." Caley's blood ran cold. She met Victoria's gaze and held it, refusing to be the first to look away. "I know who you are," she said, her tone level and devoid of emotion. Victoria's smile widened, showing a row of impossibly white, predatory teeth. "Of course you do. Nate is terrible at keeping secrets. It's one of his charms." She let her eyes drift down, her gaze lingering pointedly on Caley's abdomen. "And look at you, the dutiful wife already providing the heir. How traditional." The word traditional was delivered like an insult laced with condescension. Each word was a calculated pinprick designed to wound and humiliate. Caley placed a hand over her stomach, a gesture that was both protective and defiant. "What do you want, Victoria?" Caley asked, keeping her voice low. She would not give this woman the satisfaction of a scene. "Want?" Victoria feigned surprise, placing a manicured hand on her chest. "I have what I want. I just came over to offer my congratulations, and perhaps a bit of friendly advice." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Enjoy this while it lasts. The party's the name, the necklace." She gestured to the Beaumont sapphire. "That was supposed to be mine, you know. He bought it for me, but his advisors said giving it to you would be better for optics. Nate is all about optics." The lie was so audacious, so completely fabricated, that for a moment Caley was stunned into silence. The sapphire had been a gift for their second anniversary, purchased on a trip to Geneva they had taken together. The cruelty was breathtaking. "You see," Victoria continued, warming to her theme, "men like Nate need a certain type of wife, a placeholder, a respectable, well-bred piece of scenery to produce a child and manage the household staff. But they don't desire their scenery. For passion, for excitement, for a meeting of minds, they come to women like me." The silence around them was now absolute. Even the string quartet seemed to have faltered. Walter Jameson was standing a dozen feet away, his expression grim. Cassandra Lowell was watching with an unnerving stillness. They were all witnesses. "This baby," Victoria said, her voice turning sharp and cruel, her eyes hardening into chips of ice. "It's a temporary anchor, not a permanent one. He might feel a sense of duty, a flicker of sentimentality, but once the novelty wears off, he'll be bored, and he'll come back to me. He always does." She then delivered the killing blow, her voice ringing with finality. "So you can cling to your title and your swelling belly, but don't fool yourself. You're just the incubator. I'm the destination." A collective, barely audible gasp came from the onlookers. The insult was so vile, so profoundly personal and cruel that it transcended mere social cattiness. It was an act of pure emotional violence. At that moment, Caley felt something inside her snap. It wasn't the sound of breaking, but the sound of something forging itself into steel. The hurt was immense, a white-hot agony that seared through her chest. But beneath it, a different feeling was rising, a cold, clear, and absolute rage. Where was Nate? She scanned the room and saw him hovering near the bar, looking pale and indecisive, trapped by his own cowardice. He was watching, doing nothing. He was letting this happen. He was sanctioning her humiliation. Caley turned her attention back to Victoria. The tears that burned behind her eyes would not fall. She would not give this woman her tears. She lifted her chin, her posture radiating a dignity that felt impossibly hard to summon. "Thank you for your concern, Victoria," Caley said, her voice quiet but carrying the resonant frequency of tempered steel. "But you've misunderstood. A home is built on a foundation, not on a temporary thrill. And a legacy is something you can never touch." Victoria scoffed, but Caley saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes. She had expected hysterics, a retreat in tears. She had not expected this icy composure. Without another word, Caley turned. She didn't run. She walked her back straight, her head held high. She walked past the silent, staring faces, past Walter Jameson, whose eyes held a flicker of deep respect, and past her husband, who finally started to move towards her, his face a mask of belated concern. She held up a hand to stop him. "Don't," she said, the single word containing a universe of contempt and finality. She walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind the whispers, the scandal, and the shattered remnants of her marriage. The air of the hotel corridor felt cool and clean against her hot cheeks. She was out of the gilded cage. But she wasn't fleeing. She was retreating to plan her counterattack. The incubator had just been activated. The ride back to the penthouse was a study in suffocating silence. Nate sat beside her in the back of their chauffeured Maybach, the scent of his fear and Victoria's perfume mingling into a nauseating combination. He kept starting to speak, clearing his throat, uttering fragments like, "Caley, I can explain," and "it wasn't what it looked like." Caley didn't respond. She simply stared out the window at the blurred lights of New York City, her mind a maelstrom of cold, precise thoughts. The pain was still there, a deep tectonic ache in her soul, but her rage had crystallized into something else purpose. Victoria's words, intended to destroy her, had instead provided a moment of terrifying clarity. "I'm the destination. You're just the incubator." They had underestimated her. They saw her as scenery, a placeholder. They had no idea who she really was. When they arrived at the penthouse, Nate followed her out of the elevator, his desperation palpable. "Caley, please just talk to me. She's crazy, she's nobody." Caley finally turned to face him in the marble-floored foyer, her expression unreadable. "She's nobody," she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "You humiliated me in front of everyone we know for a nobody. You let her call our child a temporary anchor, and me an incubator. And you stood there, Nate, and you did nothing. So tell me, what does that to make you?" He flinched, having no answer. "I'm going to my mother's for the night," she said, her voice firm. "I need to think." "No, don't leave, we can sort this out," he pleaded, reaching for her arm. She pulled away as if his touch were toxic. "I'm not asking for your permission." She walked into their shared home office, a sleek, minimalist space overlooking Central Park. Nate had often praised her eye for design, how she'd transformed the cold corporate space into something both functional and beautiful. It was here, amidst the trappings of their shared life, that the first piece of her plan began to form. Her eyes landed on the family iPad, a device they both used synced to their shared cloud account. Nate was technologically careless, prizing convenience over security. He often boasted about closing deals from that very device. He was so consumed by the Ethelred merger. He spoke about it incessantly, the intricate details, the players involved, the astronomical sums of money. Victoria's words echoed in her mind. A meeting of minds. What if Victoria wasn't just a physical distraction? What if she was involved in his business? The thought was a spark in the darkness. It felt right. Victoria wasn't the type to be a passive participant. She was a predator, always looking for an angle. While Nate was in the other room, frantically calling someone likely, Victoria Caley picked up the iPad. She went to the shared photo stream, expecting to find more evidence of his affair. But her intuition guided her elsewhere. She opened the synced files, the cloud drive, where Nate kept copies of his work documents for easy access. It was a long shot, a desperate hope. She navigated through folders labeled mergers, projections, and investor decks. Then she saw it a folder mislabeled vacation plans, Italy. It was an old habit of his, hiding sensitive documents under innocuous names. Her heart quickened. Inside wasn't an itinerary for the Amalfi Coast. It was a trove of documents related to the Ethelred merger. But there was one subfolder that made her blood freeze. It was labeled VR Comms. She opened it. It was a series of encrypted messages and documents exchanged between Nate and Victoria Roche. It was worse than she could have ever imagined. Nate wasn't just having an affair. He was actively colluding with Victoria. The documents laid it all out. Victoria, through a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, had been buying up Ethelred stock for months using insider information fed to her directly by Nate. His plan was to drive the price down with a manufactured bad news leak, have her buy up a controlling interest at a bargain price, and then announce the Beaumont Holdings takeover, sending the stock soaring. They stood to make hundreds of millions in illicit profits on top of the merger itself. It was conspiracy. It was insider trading. It was a federal crime of the highest order. Caley's hands trembled as she airdropped the entire folder to her own secure device. It was all there. Timestamps, account numbers, offshore corporation details. He had handed her the gun, the bullets, and a signed confession. His arrogance, his belief that she was just scenery, would be his undoing. She looked up as Nate walked back into the office, his face etched with anxiety. "Caley, I've told her to stay away from us. It's over. I promise. It's you and the baby. That's all that matters." Caley looked at him, at this man she had once loved, and felt nothing but a profound, icy pity. He wasn't a titan of industry. He was a fool, a common criminal wrapped in a bespoke suit. "I need to get some air," she said, her voice betraying none of the seismic shock she was feeling. She picked up her clutch, the iPad's incriminating contents now safely on her phone within it. "I'll come with you," he offered, desperate. "No," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I need to be alone." She walked out of the office, out of the penthouse, and out of his life. As the elevator descended, she didn't feel like a victim escaping. She felt like a general leaving a successfully infiltrated enemy command center, holding the launch codes to their complete and utter destruction. The game had changed. This was no longer about a broken heart. It was about justice. Instead of going to her mother's, Caley directed the driver to a location Nate would never think of, the 24-hour lounge of the Soho Grand Hotel. It was anonymous, chic, and filled with people too self-absorbed to notice a distraught woman in a couture gown. She needed a neutral space to think, a place untainted by memories of her life with Nate. She found a secluded booth, ordered a pot of chamomile tea, and took out her phone. For a moment, the sheer scale of what she had discovered was paralyzing. This wasn't just marital infidelity. It was a criminal conspiracy that could send both Nate and Victoria to prison for years. It would annihilate Beaumont Holdings, a company that had been in his family for 3 generations. It would create a scandal of epic proportions. Part of her, a small, frightened part, wanted to use the information as leverage, to force him into a quiet, generous divorce, to disappear with her child and a comfortable settlement. That would be the safe path, the easy way out. But then she remembered Victoria's sneering face. "You're just the incubator." She remembered the public humiliation, the pitying looks, the utter contempt. She remembered Nate's cowardice, his weak-willed refusal to defend her or their unborn child. A quiet divorce wouldn't be justice. It would be a transaction. It would allow them to walk away bruised, but not broken free, to continue their lives of casual cruelty and corruption. It would teach them nothing. Cassandra Lowell's words came back to her. Sometimes a tactical explosion is necessary to clear the field. Caley took a deep, steadying breath. She would not be clearing the field. She would be salting the earth. Her first call was to her father. Not to cry on his shoulder, but for a piece of information. "Dad," she said, her voice calm and measured, "I need the name of the best corporate litigator in New York. Not a divorce lawyer, a shark. The kind of person you call when a company's life is on the line." Dr. Bastor. Davenport, sensing the urgency and steel in his daughter's voice, didn't waste time with questions. "Arthur Chen," he said instantly. "He's a partner at Hotel Lipton. He's legendary. Brutal but unimpeachably ethical. Caley is everything all right." "Everything is about to be," she said. "I love you." She hung up and immediately found the contact information for Arthur Chen. It was well past midnight, but she sent him an email with the subject line, "Urgent matter, recommendation from Dr. Davenport." In the body, she wrote a single sentence. "I have incontrovertible proof of insider trading and securities fraud related to the Ethelred merger. I need to meet you at your earliest possible convenience. I can be at your office at 6 a.m. Next, she considered her options. Going directly to the SEC was one path, but that would be a slow, bureaucratic process. She needed something faster, more explosive. She needed to detonate this in the court of public opinion. At the same time, it hit the regulators. She needed to control the narrative. She thought of Cassandra Lowell. The media CEO had shown her a flicker of kindness of alliance. More importantly, Cassandra was a pragmatist and a predator. She would recognize the value of a scoop this massive. Lowell Media Group was a direct competitor to several outlets that were famously friendly to Nate Beaumont. Breaking this story would be a coup for Cassandra both professionally and personally. Caley opened a new encrypted email account. She composed a second message, this one addressed to a specific person, Benjamin Carter. Cassandra Lowell's most feared investigative journalist. She had read his work. He was a Pulitzer winner known for his relentless pursuit of financial corruption. To Carter, she wrote a slightly longer but still anonymous message. Subject tip regarding Ethelred merger, Mr. Carter, you will soon receive a package at your office via courier. It contains documents detailing a massive insider trading scheme orchestrated by Nathaniel Beaumont, CEO of Beaumont Holdings, and his associate Victoria Roche, through a shell company named Roche Capital Partners in the Cayman Islands. The evidence will show that Beaumont has been feeding Roche non-public information for months to manipulate the stock of Ethelred plc. The package includes transaction records, encrypted communications, and offshore banking details. I suggest you cross-reference the trade dates with Beaumont Holdings' private flight logs to St. Bart's and Geneva where he met with Roche. Check everything. The story is bigger than you can imagine. This information is provided on the condition of absolute source anonymity. A second copy of this evidence is being sent to the SEC Enforcement Division. You have a 24-hour head start. She attached one single, heavily redacted document to the email, just enough to prove she wasn't bluffing. It was a bank transfer statement from Nate to Roche Capital Partners for 7 figures labeled consulting fee. She hit send. Finally, she began the meticulous process of assembling the digital package for the courier and for her new lawyer. She copied the files onto 2 encrypted USB drives. She felt a strange detachment as she did it, as if she were an architect drawing up demolition plans for a condemned building. The life she had known was over. The penthouse, the Galas, the Beaumont name, it was all just rubble now. By 4 a.m., she was done. She arranged for a secure courier to pick up the package for Ben Carter at 7 a.m. and deliver it to the Lowell Media Group headquarters. As the first hints of dawn began to streak the sky, Caley finally leaned back in the booth. She wasn't the grieving wife anymore. She had become something new. She was the architect of their downfall. They had wanted a war, and she was about to give them one, so total, so devastating, that they would never recover from the first shot. At 6:05 a.m., Caley was sitting opposite Arthur Chen in a sound-proofed conference room on the 50th floor of the CBS building. Chen was in his late 60s, with a mind as sharp as the crease in his trousers. He listened without interruption as Caley laid out the story, his face an impassive mask. When she finished, she slid one of the encrypted USB drives across the polished mahogany table. He plugged it into his laptop, and for 15 minutes, the only sound was the soft clicking of his keyboard. His expression slowly shifted from professional neutrality to one of grim fascination. "My God," he murmured, looking up from the screen. "Mrs. Beaumont. Caley. This is not just a smoking gun. This is the entire arsenal. He documented his own federal crimes with the diligence of a bookkeeper. I need to protect myself and my child," Caley said, her voice firm. "I want to file for divorce immediately. I want my assets secured before this becomes public knowledge and everything is frozen. And I want to ensure that I am legally insulated from any of this. I had no knowledge of his criminal activities." Chen nodded, his mind already working several steps ahead. "We will file an emergency petition this morning citing irreconcilable differences and referencing a discovery of illicit activities that place you and your unborn child at risk. We will petition the judge to immediately separate your known personal assets from the marital estate, particularly anything you brought into the marriage. Your inheritance from your grandparents, your design firm's preliminary accounts, we shield it all. Given the evidence you've brought me, no judge will refuse." He paused, looking at her with a newfound respect. "You've been very, very smart about this. The anonymous tip to the press and the SEC. By the time Beaumont even knows what's happening, he'll be fighting a war on 3 fronts: legal, financial, and public opinion. He won't stand a chance." While Arthur Chen set the legal machinery in motion, the second USB drive was already making its way across Manhattan. At 7:30 a.m., Benjamin Carter received the package at his desk. A known cynic who received dozens of crackpot tips a week, he almost dismissed it. But the sender's email had been professional, and the mention of the SEC piqued his interest. He plugged in the drive. For the next hour, his newsroom colleagues watched as Carter, a man famous for his stoicism, let out a series of low whistles. He began making calls, his voice low and urgent. He called his contacts at the FAA to check flight logs. He called a source in the Cayman Islands. He called a forensic accountant. Every piece of Caley's information checked out. It was a perfectly wrapped bombshell story. The first tremor hit at 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time. An alert from the Lowell Newswire flashed across every terminal on Wall Street. Beaumont Holdings CEO Nathaniel Beaumont, Associate Victoria Roach, under investigation for insider trading in Ethelred merger. Sources cite massive securities, fraud scheme. SEC said to be reviewing evidence. The market reacted with brutal, instantaneous violence. Trading of Beaumont Holdings, NYSE, BEH, and Ethelred PLC Nasdaq, AETL, was immediately halted. When it resumed 15 minutes later, it was a bloodbath. BEH stock plummeted 60% in a matter of minutes, wiping out billions of dollars in market value. AETL, now seen as a target of criminal manipulation, also nosedived. In his office on the 70th floor of Beaumont Tower, Nate was in a state of apoplectic panic. His phone was ringing off the hook, his board members, his investors, his PR team. He saw the headline and felt the world drop out from beneath him. How could anyone have known his first call was to Victoria? She answered, her voice hysterical. "Nate, what is this? My accounts have been frozen. The bank just called me. My name is everywhere. Where did they get this information?" he yelled into the phone. "Nobody knew. It was just you and me." And then A sudden sickening realization dawned on him. The file on the shared drive. The one mislabeled vacation plans. He had been in it just 2 days ago. He had been careless. He thought back to last night, to Caley's chilling calm, her quiet departure. I need to be alone. Caley. He whispered the name, tasting like poison. It was Caley. The full story from Ben Carter dropped on the Lowell Media homepage at 3 p.m. It was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, complete with copies of incriminating emails, transaction logs, and a detailed timeline of the entire conspiracy. It painted a portrait not of a brilliant CEO, but of a common grifter and his greedy accomplice. The story went viral within minutes. By 5 p.m., federal agents from the SEC and FBI were walking into the lobby of Beaumont Tower with a search warrant. Nate Beaumont's professional life was over. Simultaneously, Caley was in a judge's chambers with Arthur Chen. Presented with the evidence of Nate's criminal conduct and the imminent freezing of all Beaumont assets, the judge signed the emergency order. Caley's personal funds were shielded. The divorce was filed. A restraining order against Nate was granted, citing the need to protect her from the fallout of his criminal enterprise. That evening, Caley sat in the quiet living room of her parents' home in Connecticut. The TV was on the volume low. Every news channel was leading with the story. They showed pictures of Nate being escorted from his office, his face pale and stunned. They showed a photo of Victoria Roche, pulled from her Instagram, looking glamorous and now utterly toxic. The destination had become a dead end. There was no triumph on Caley's face, only a quiet, somber resolve. She had not done this for revenge, not truly. She had done it for survival. She had done it for the small, innocent life growing inside her. She had done it because they had left her no other choice. She had been pushed to the edge, and she had discovered that she was not made of glass, but of forged steel. The tactical explosion had cleared the field, and from the ashes she would now begin to build. The fallout was more catastrophic than anyone could have predicted. The Ethelred merger was officially dead, with the European company announcing its own lawsuit against Beaumont Holdings for market manipulation. The Beaumont Board of Directors forced Nathaniel's immediate resignation, a futile gesture to stop the bleeding. The company, a legacy built over 80 years, was facing bankruptcy and federal seizure. Nate Beaumont and Victoria Roche were arrested and charged with multiple counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Their bail was set at an astronomical figure that neither could meet, as all their assets were frozen pending the investigation. The glamorous photos from the gala, published just days before, were now used by news outlets as the before pictures to their spectacular fall from grace. They were no longer society figures. They were case numbers in a federal docket. The social world they had so desperately coveted turned on them with a viciousness reserved for its own. Friends and associates publicly distanced themselves. Invitations were rescinded. Their names became bywords for scandal and disgrace. Victoria, the woman who had lived her life for public attention, found herself hounded by paparazzi, her carefully constructed image shattered into 1,000,000 sordid pieces. She had craved the Beaumont name, and now it was an anchor dragging her to the bottom. Throughout it all, Caley remained entirely silent. She gave no interviews. She issued no statements. Guided by Arthur Chen, she navigated the legal complexities of the divorce with quiet efficiency. Her anonymity as the source of the leak was ironclad, though in the circles that mattered, everyone knew. They didn't see her as a scorned wife. They saw her as a force of nature. Walter Jameson, the old money patriarch, was one of her first calls of support. "Your father was a great man, Caley," he'd said, his voice warm with respect. "He would be incredibly proud of the strength you've shown. If you need anything at all to help you start over, my door is always open." His public support was a signal to the rest of their world. Caley Davenport was not to be trifled with. She was one of their own. 6 months later, the world was a different place. Nate Beaumont, facing overwhelming evidence, took a plea deal. He was sentenced to 12 years in a federal correctional facility. Victoria Roach, who tried to betray Nate in exchange for a lighter sentence, was found to be more deeply involved than she let on. She was sentenced to 7 years. Their partnership, forged in greed and arrogance, had ended in mutual destruction. On a bright spring day, Caley stood in a light-filled, empty office space in the meatpacking district. The large windows overlooked the Hudson River. The scent of fresh paint and possibility hung in the air. The divorce was finalized. She had reverted to her maiden name. She was Caley Davenport again. She placed a hand on her now very prominent baby bump, feeling a gentle kick from within. The Beaumont sapphire was long gone, sold to a private collector. The proceeds, along with her secured assets, had become the seed money for her new venture, Davenport Designs, a boutique architectural and interior design firm. Her first major client was Walter Jameson, who had commissioned her to redesign the new wing of the Metropolitan Arts Foundation, the very organization that had hosted the fateful gala. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Cassandra Lowell. "Heard you landed the MAF contract. Knew you had it in you. The world needs more builders and fewer demolition men. Let's have lunch next week." Caley smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. The past year had been a trial by fire, a crucible that had burned away the gilded facade of her old life and revealed the strength that had been there all along. She had lost a husband and a life she thought she wanted, but she had found herself. She looked out the window at the endless expanse of the city, a landscape of steel and glass, ambition and dreams. It was a city of foundations, both seen and unseen. She had been a victim of a weak foundation, one built on lies and betrayal. But now she was building her own. For herself and for her child. It would be a legacy not of wealth or power, but of resilience, integrity, and the quiet, unshakable strength of a woman who had walked through the fire and emerged not scorched, but forged. 3 seasons had turned since the fall of the House of Beaumont. The biting winter had given way to a tentative spring which had blossomed into the full, confident warmth of a New York summer. For Caley Davenport, the passage of time was marked not by society columns or stock market tickers, but by the steady, miraculous growth of the life within her and the tangible rise of her own creation. The grand unveiling of the new Jameson wing at the Metropolitan Arts Foundation was the most anticipated cultural event of the season. It was also the official debut of Davenport Designs. Caley, now nearly 9 months pregnant, stood not as a guest or a +1, but as the celebrated architect at the heart of it all. She wore a simple, elegant, cream-colored dress that didn't hide her pregnancy, but celebrated it. She felt more powerful, more herself than she ever had in borrowed jewels and a borrowed name. The space was her vision brought to life. Where there had once been a series of small, dark galleries, there was now an atrium of light and air. Walls of glass invited the city in, while clean, minimalist lines allowed the art to breathe. It was a space built on principles of integrity, strength and transparency, everything her old life had lacked. "You haven't just designed a building, my dear. Walter Jameson said, his voice filled with genuine admiration as he stood beside her. "You've given the collection a soul." "She's given it a backbone, Walter," Cassandra Lowell interjected, joining them with a flute of champagne in hand. She eyed Caley's sparkling water with a wry smile. "It's what she's good at, finding the steel, exposing it for all to see. A lesson a few people learned the hard way." Caley smiled, accepting the compliment. The whispers about her role in Nate's downfall had long faded, replaced by murmurs of respect for her talent. Her past was a part of her story, but it no longer defined her. Later that evening, she found a quiet moment on a balcony overlooking the floodlit park. The distant sounds of the party, the clinking glasses and appreciative laughter, felt a world away from the toxic hum of the gala that had changed her life. That night had been about destruction. This night was about creation. She had taken the rubble of her past and used it as the foundation for her future. 2 weeks later, on a quiet Tuesday morning, Caley Davenport's new world truly began. After 12 hours of labor, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Leo Davenport. He was a lion, a symbol of the strength she never knew she had. Holding him in her arms in the quiet stillness of the hospital room, she looked down at his tiny, perfect face and felt a love so profound it reordered her universe. This was her legacy. Not a portfolio of stocks or a portfolio of real estate, but this warm, breathing, beautiful child. He was her foundation, her anchor, her masterpiece. A few days later, back in her new home, a sun-drenched brownstone in the West Village that she was slowly renovating herself. Caley sat in a rocking chair in the nursery. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Leo was asleep in her arms, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The city hummed outside, but in this room there was only peace. There were no more thoughts of Nate or Victoria, no lingering bitterness. They were ghosts from another life, faded figures in a story that was over. Her story was just beginning. It would be a story of late nights with blueprints and early mornings with her son. It would be a story built of her own 2 hands, filled with authentic joy and earned success. She had been through the fire and had not just survived, but had learned to build with the ashes. Looking at the sleeping child in her arms, Caley knew with absolute certainty that she was finally home. 5 years is a lifetime. For Caley Davenport, it was the span of time it took to transform from a survivor into a luminary. Davenport Designs was no longer a fledgling startup, but a powerhouse in the architectural world, synonymous with sustainable innovation and soulful, light-filled spaces. Her name was now mentioned in the same breath as the industry's titans, not because of who she had married, but because of the city-shaping projects she had built. Leo was a whirlwind of crayon drawings and boundless curiosity. He was the sun around which her universe gracefully orbited. Her life was full, not with the frantic, hollow schedule of a society wife, but with the deeply satisfying rhythm of meaningful work and devoted motherhood. One autumn evening, Caley found herself at an event that felt like a distant echo of her past, a formal awards dinner held at the New York Public Library. She was there to accept the prestigious Visionary in Urban Design award. As she moved through the crowd, she felt a sense of calm authority. These were her peers. She belonged here. During the reception, her attention was drawn to a small group nearby. Gregory Dalton, a notoriously arrogant and powerful senior partner at a rival firm, was holding court. Standing beside him was a young, brilliant architect named Sophie Chen, whose innovative work on a new museum project, a joint venture with Dalton's firm, had been the talk of the industry. The core concept, the interplay of light and shadow, was something I conceptualized years ago, Dalton was saying, his voice booming with self-importance. Sophie was, of course, an invaluable asset in executing the technical details. Caley watched as the light in Sophie's eyes dimmed. She saw the young woman's shoulders slump, her contributions being publicly erased by the man who was supposed to be her mentor. The other listeners nodded along, unwilling to challenge a man as influential as Gregory Dalton. It was the Gala all over again. The same public diminishment, the same cowardly silence from onlookers. Caley felt a ghost of her former self flicker within her, the woman standing by the pillar, helpless and humiliated. But she was not that woman anymore. Excusing herself from her own conversation, Caley walked over to the group with a warm, deliberate smile. "Gregory, a fantastic speech," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through his monologue. "And Sophie, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." She turned her full attention to the young woman, ignoring Dalton for a moment. "I was so struck by your published schematics for the museum's cantilevered entrance. The way you used post-tensioned concrete to create that sense of weightlessness was nothing short of genius. It was a bold and audacious solution. Truly your signature." The effect was immediate. Sophie's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. The other architects in the circle, now given permission by someone of Caley's stature, began to murmur in agreement. Gregory Dalton was left momentarily speechless, his narrative hijacked. He had been exposed not by an accusation, but by an expert's praise of another. Caley had not raised her voice. She had not caused a scene. She had simply and precisely built a truth that was being demolished. Later she found Sophie by the bar. "Thank you," Sophie said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what that meant." "Yes, I do," Caley replied softly. "Never let anyone else hold the pen that writes your story. Your work speaks for itself. Just make sure you're the one holding the microphone." She gave Sophie's arm a reassuring squeeze and handed her a business card. "If you ever want to talk about buildings, careers, anything at all, give me a call." That night, as she unlocked the door to her quiet brownstone, she was met with the familiar comfort of home. Leo had waited up for her, and he sleepily asked her if she had won her prize. "I did, sweetheart," she said, lifting him into her arms. "What did you build?" he mumbled into her shoulder. Caley paused, thinking of the magnificent glass and steel structures she was famous for, and then of the small, vital act of fortification she had performed tonight. "Tonight," she whispered, kissing the top of his head, "I helped someone else fix their foundation, and that felt like the biggest prize of all." In the quiet of her son's bedroom, surrounded by blueprints for a life she had designed and built herself, Caley Davenport finally understood the true nature of karma. It wasn't just about punishment or reward. It was about balance. It was about taking the broken pieces of your own past and using them not as weapons, but as tools to build a better, stronger, and more compassionate future for yourself and for those who came after. So what can we take away from Caley's incredible story? It's a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about the name you carry or the wealth you display. It's about the silent integrity you hold when no one is watching, and the courage you find when the entire world is. Victoria and Nate built their lives on a foundation of greed and arrogance, and it crumbled at the first tremor of truth. Caley, faced with the ultimate betrayal, didn't just survive. She became the architect of her own better future. She proved that the most powerful karma isn't loud or vengeful. It's the quiet, satisfying click of a world realigning itself with justice. What did you think of the way Caley handled the situation? Was it brilliant strategy or cold-hearted revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of strength and resilience, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life drama, where karma always has the final word.